Let's take a look at how we configure App Proxy with Azure Active Directory. Now, to set this up, I'm going to take a look at Azure Active Directory and go to my App Proxy settings. So here we have Application Proxy. Now, I've done a lot of pre-work with this because there's a number of steps involved, and the scenario that I'm going to kind of walk you through is using App Proxy as a way to connect to Remote Desktop Services Gateway. So I have a Remote Desktop Services Gateway deployed within my data center, and I've installed the connector on that RD Gateway server. Now there's a help article you can read on how to walk through and do the configuration for RDS, but it essentially involves setting up RDS, downloading the connector. The connector has no configuration whatsoever other than you install it. It prompts you to log on to Azure Active Directory, and once it does, it registers itself right here. There's literally no other configuration that you have to do. Once it's registered, you can then go ahead and register RD Web Access as an enterprise app. So that's registered. You can see right here. It's active, it's communicating, and everything is good on that front. Now there's also a PowerShell command you run on the RDS server. Again, you can simply search for the help article on how to configure Remote Desktop Web Access with App Proxy. It'll tell you the PowerShell command to run. So once that's done, we're going to go over here to Enterprise Applications. And I'm going to click on Application Proxy. Sorry, it's going to click on All Applications. And you can see that I've got an application for RD Web already registered. Now, the process to register an application is pretty simple. So we're going to come in here and we're going to add our own on-premises application. It's going to ask me for the URL and the name. I'm just going to make a second version of this, the internal URL. Which in my case is this, rdsvm/rd. Again, this acts as a reverse proxy, so this is the internal URL that's valid on the local area network that this server is on. It's then going to generate the external URL that's going to be used, whether or not you're going to use pre-authentication or just straight pass-through. The connector group, which again, I've only got one connector group right now, which is default. Whether I want to use headers. Now in the case of RD Web Access, one of the settings you have is you turn the headers to no, and then I go ahead and I add this. And that's really all that you have to do. Once it's added, I'm going to back out of all these screens. I'm just going to click on the existing application. Now you can go through and actually perform whatever configuration you want to govern access to remote desktop services using this Azure-based enterprise application. For example, you can choose which users and groups are allowed to access the application proxy and therefore access RD Web Access. Now again, simply granting access to the application proxy endpoint doesn't necessarily grant them access to RD Web Access. If you want to have a full experience where Azure Active Directory actually manages the user accounts, the authentication, the pass-through, and it's a full single sign-on experience, there's additional work you've got to do, and the options that are available depend on the type of application you've deployed, the type of authentication it uses, the APIs, the endpoints it has available, but it supports things like, for example, single sign-on. It supports this notion of automatically provisioning user accounts. So if you have an on-prem application and you authenticate via the app proxy, you can actually have it automatically create user accounts within that application, grant the user access, and then when the user de-authenticates, remove that user account. But again, this all assumes that the application supports the necessary APIs. You can enable users to self-enroll in the application. And you can also create different rules for conditional access. For example, if you're a member of a group, you get access to the application. So all these properties become available to help you govern access. Now, once these are all configured, at the end of the day, we simply navigate to My App. myapps.microsoft.com, and then authenticate, and you'll get a list of the enterprise applications that are available to you. Now, I need to authenticate as a user that has access to some of those applications. So we're just going to come over here in a private session. Log on as a user in Contoso Blue. And you'll see that I've got access to this RD Web application. So I click on that, and it takes me straight through to, actually got an error in the URL in this one. So it's an easy fix. I just haven't fixed it. Takes me straight through to remote app and desktop connections RD Web access. So that's a quick look at using App Proxy to access remote desktop services.